Well, good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to November's Ask the ARC webinar. Tonight, we're going to be talking about bringing in that next generation of support. My name is Carly Shortino Poulter. I'm the director of the ARC Advocacy Network. And even more importantly, I'm a fellow mom. I have a 23-year-old son with autism, and I have a 17-year-old son who does not have autism. And so these are things that I'm thinking of, and these are things that my friends are thinking of. And these are things that are becoming a real issue in our lives. And so, especially as the holidays are approaching, and we're going to have our family and our extended family in our lives for the next couple of months, I wanted to make sure that we were talking about this topic so that we can begin some of these processes. Now, as we go along tonight, we're going to be talking about how to bring in that next generation of support. But I will also point out that we are recording this webinar and we will be posting it on the ARC Academy and on our YouTube channel. So I would love to have your questions. You can post them either in the Q&A session or in the chat. We will get to those as we go along. But I do want to point out that since we are recording this, you might want to be a little careful about what information you share. And so I'd like to go ahead and get started. So as always, allow me to share my screen. And so we're going to start by talking about bringing in that next generation of support. As I said, I'm Carly. I'm with the ARC of Indiana. If you're not familiar with the ARC, or if this is your first session with us, just to give you kind of an explainer as to who we are. We are an advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. We were established back in 1956 by families who wanted a better life for their children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as simple as that sounds. Today, we are the leading advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. We are committed to progressive legislation and public policy to protect the rights and improve services for people with IDD. We are home of the ARC Master Trust. We are the founders of the Erskine Green Training Institute, and we're part of the ARC of the United States because the ARC is a national organization. And so the good news is that most states have an ARC chapter. So in part of this future planning, if there's the possibility that somebody may move states, one of the things you can always do is reach out to the ARC chapter in that state to find out what things look like there. So I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to think about this. Many of us feel paralyzed when we're trying to think about what happens when we're gone. It's incredibly overwhelming. And there aren't easy answers, so we don't know what to do. And so we think to ourselves, we'll just deal with it later. But the thing is, we have to do this. And we have to make these plans because a lot of times what happens is we always think we'll do it later and it doesn't happen. And when it's needed, those plans weren't there. So we've got to start talking about this. So in my experience, when it comes to, determining who is going to step in when mom and dad are no longer available, the typical process goes something like mom or mom and dad think about who they want and who they think would be a responsible caregiver for their loved one with a disability. They put that in their will. They often assume that a sibling will take over, and oftentimes, although not always, it's normally the oldest sister who they designate to be taking over. They may or may not have talked to the person that they designate to take over. And in my experience, they definitely don't talk to their loved one with a disability about any of this. In my experience, there's often no other discussion. If there was an initial conversation, that's typically the last conversation that's had. And then what happens is when mom and dad pass away, everybody scrambles because nobody knows for sure what to do. So let's talk about the impact on the designated person. They're scared. In my experience, they fall into one of a few categories. Now, let me also start by saying, while I wind up having this conversation with that next generation, rarely, I don't have somebody calling up saying, "Hey, Carly, just to let you know, my mom passed away about a month ago. I'm taking over as Jimmy's caregiver. We got this. Everything's okay. Just wanted to let you know." Nobody's calling me with that information. People are calling me because they need help with something. And so that does tend to skew my experiences here. But in my experience, that next generation falls into one of several categories. The first category is the determined. They are the ones who, they love their sibling. They've been given this assignment to take over. They are determined to make it happen. They're not sure what to do, but by golly, they're just going to power through. You tell me what I need to do. That's one set. Then I get the calls from the overwhelmed, the they've got the deer in the headlights and they're like, "Oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do?" And sometimes it's the sibling, or, that family member. And sometimes it's actually the in-law who's calling me because they are basically splitting up tasks because nobody knows what to do. They weren't prepared for this and they're feeling completely overwhelmed at the idea of it. They don't know where to start. Then I talk to the resentful. "I cannot believe they did this to me. Nobody bothered to prepare me for this. What in God's name am I supposed to do? I work full time. How am I supposed to become a full-time caregiver?" And then we have the nopes. Somebody decided this. They did not consult with me. I am not doing this. You've got to find another option here. People tend to fall in one of those categories most of the time, at least the ones who are calling me. And to varying levels, it's because they are all feeling overwhelmed. They don't know what it means to be that next generation of support person or that next generation of caregiver, if that's actually what's needed. They don't know what resources are available to them. They think they have to do all of this on their own. And this is not, while they've had some experience with this world, they weren't involved that deeply, so they don't know where to go or what to do. And most importantly, they don't really know what is expected of them. What does it mean to be that next generation of caregiver or that next generation of support? Somebody's asking, is a will legal? Would my child become the caregiver of our disabled son, have full legal authority? That is a great question. No, because it doesn't work like that. And we're going to get more into that later. And I'm really, really glad you asked that. So, Dan, I'm going to ask you a favor and remind me when we get down to the practical parts of this to address this question, because it's a question that we absolutely have to address. And a big part of that is because if we're talking about a child under 18, yes, putting that information in a will works. But if we're talking about somebody who's over 18, it doesn't work the same way. And so I'm kind of going through that lens of assuming that this is an adult with a disability that we're talking about. So we're going to get there, and it's a really, really important question. So please remind me when we get a little closer. So that's the impact on the person that was designated as caregiver. But we also need to think about the impact of on the person with a disability, because that is something that in my experience is somewhat overlooked and somewhat minimized, because, especially when it's a sibling who's taking over, they're thinking, "Oh, well, I lost my parent too. So, we're going through the same things." But it's not the same. Because oftentimes when an adult with a disability has lost their last remaining parent, they're losing everything, because oftentimes it's not just a parent. They've been doing everything together. They go shopping together. They do all activities together. That parent is their foundation. So it's not just losing a parent as an adult, it's more like losing a combination of your parent, your best friend, and your partner in crime all at the same time. And oftentimes, when that parent passes away, suddenly that individual is expected to move. So they're not just losing their parent, they're also losing their home. And oftentimes, they're not just losing their parent and their home, but they're also moving communities. So then they're losing their friends and they're losing the life that they have built for themselves. So in reality, they haven't just lost a parent, they're often losing everything in their life all at the same time. And they've had no input on what's going on. They're often not consulted about what they want in life. They're expected to have a whole new routine where somebody may or may not have shared the expectations with them. And then suddenly they start having behaviors because they're grieving and they're angry and they may lash out. And you know what? Many people without disabilities do the exact same thing. But when it's somebody with a disability, we refer to it as behaviors instead of just being royally ticked off. That's what's happening. And yeah, they're going to have difficulty adjusting. And there's going to be a lot of anger and a lot of grief all mixed in. And it's incredibly difficult to get grief counseling when you're a person with a disability. So then you don't have somebody who can help you process it and help you think about, what's going on in your life. What are the next steps? What are the things that you need to do? And so oftentimes we underestimate the stress and the grief that the person with a disability is going through, while the person who's likely stepping in as caregiver is also going through their own grief and their own anger and their own feelings of being overwhelmed. It just looks differently. When I was 33 years old, I lost my dad. And I hadn't lived with my dad in 15 years. So it's not like he was my daily caregiver. But at the same time, I cried every single day for a month. And then I cried every other day for another 6 weeks. And I don't have a disability. And I didn't live with my dad. I still had my home and my kids and my normal, my everyday tasks, my regular routine. But I was still lost. I was still grieving. Now imagine a person with a disability going through that, but it's not just their parent they've lost. It's everything they've lost. And so yeah, they're going to lash out, they're going to be emotional, they're going to be angry. And oftentimes we overlook that anger piece of grief, which is incredibly common. So they're going through all of that. Those are the things that the individual with a disability is dealing with. Those are the things that the person designated as the next generation is dealing with. And so everybody's feeling overwhelmed. Everybody's really emotional. Everybody's raw at that point. They don't know what to do. That is what is commonly happening. But there's a better way. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So, where do you even start with all of this? Well, you start by talking to people and talk with lots of people, not just the siblings, if your child even has siblings, but you talk with the siblings and the cousins and the aunts and uncles and the nieces and nephews and the family friends, because sometimes those family friends are closer than family. Talk to the people in your life. But I'm not saying go up to them and say, hey, if something happens to me, will you take care of Auntie? Because I'll tell you what, that's like proposing to somebody before you've even gone on your first date. You're not there yet. We got to lay some groundwork first. So we start by talking about our loved one's life, the things that they're doing, the things that they're good at. This is the time to brag on your kid. Talk about what you do for them and what they do for you. You know what? That's something that we often don't think about. We don't necessarily think about the things that our loved ones with disabilities do for us, but they actually do a lot for us too. Whether it's, being the one to always take out the trash or doing the dishes or the laundry, or any sorts of things like that, or just coming up and giving you a hug when you had a bad day, making you tea, whatever those things. There are a lot of things that our loved ones with disabilities do for us. Think about what those are and share that information with people. And think about talk about the things that they're involved in. Do they work? Are they in Special Olympics? Are they, do they go to the Y and go swimming on a regular basis? What are the things they're involved with? And then also talk about the supports that they get and the other supports that are available. Because in my experience, one of the biggest pieces of fear comes from the idea that next generation will be doing everything all on their own. And so we need to talk with them about, what types of things our loved ones are involved with, including the services that they're involved with and the supports that they get, so that we're starting to show that the person has a lot of different things in their life, and that next generation won't be alone in trying to figure this out. Then picture the life that you want for your loved one. What do you want your loved one's life to look like? Do you want them to live alone? And by the way, when we talk about living alone, that doesn't mean that they're on an island somewhere completely isolated. I mean, we can still have lots of involvement even when they're living on their own. Do we want them to live with housemates? Do we want them to live with other family? And then what can you put in place now to make some of those things happen? Because a lot of times, if we can do some of these transitions before mom and dad pass away, it makes those transitions a lot easier. Because when somebody has already established their own home, either on their own, with housemates, with other family members, when mom and dad pass away, we're just dealing with the grief of mom and dad passing away, not also losing the only home that they've ever known their whole life, and all of the supports and friends and the life that they've built for themselves. So if we can start building in some of these transitions ahead of time, it makes things a lot easier. But then also think about, what things do our loved ones still need? Are there skills that they still need to learn? Is there technology that we can put in place to make life easier? What supports do they still need? And what supports will they need when we're gone? And then what do you want supports to look like? I remember several years ago, my younger son, he might have been in middle school, but we were talking about some of these things, because you should have these conversations early and often. And he said to me, Mom, don't worry about it. No matter where I live, I will always have a room in my house for Andy. And I looked at him and I said, Michael, that is so sweet of you. And I am so proud of you. I'm so proud of how much you love your brother. But I don't want that. I don't want that for him. And I don't want that for you. I want him to be able to have his own life, just like everybody else would. And I want you to be able to have your own life. Don't get me wrong. I want you to have your brother's back. I want you to be his wingman. And when he needs help, I know you'll be there for him. But I want him to have his own life. And I want you to have your own life. Think about it. What do you want for your loved one? What do you want that to look like? And then who all will be involved in your loved one's life? Or who all do you want involved with your loved one's life? And how many people will be involved? Because oftentimes we think about just having one person, and at the same time, that's a lot to expect. And so when we can spread that out, that works a lot more. So somebody's asking, what is a good age to begin transition? I will say as early as possible. And the reason I say that is because you can take things in small stages and in small increments. So, one of the things we want to do is we want to help our loved ones with disabilities be as independent as possible. And so, if we're talking, they're still kids, they're still under 18, part of that is teaching them the skills to be independent. If they're over 18 and they haven't learned some of those independent skills, or they've learned some, but they still have others to start, to learn, by all means do that. At the same time, the earlier you can start having those conversations about what you want life to look like and what you want support to look like for your loved one, the better that will be. So like when my younger son was in middle school and we're talking about these things, I'm telling him, I want Andy to have his own life. But you know what? There are things I help him out with, and there are things that someday when I'm gone, you're going to need to help him out with, like understanding, understanding letters that come to him, or helping him figure out what he wants to do because he has trouble with that, and he's going to need your help with that. And we're also talking about things like Medicaid because I'm never going to make my son talk to the Medicaid office. That's just cruel. So, I'm don't get me wrong. I always talk to my son with autism about Medicaid. He's the one who actually makes decisions, but I also know he feels really overwhelmed when he has to make decisions. He can do it, he just doesn't like to. And so, we talk about these things so that he can understand, so that hopefully someday he can start making those phone calls. And then initially, those are going to be phone calls that we make together until he learns how to do it on his own. But I'm also teaching these things to my younger son so that if something did happen to me, he can step in and help Andy with all of those things too. So ideally, you do it as early as you can. And this is the piece that is so often missing. Talk to your loved one with a disability about this. It is their life. They should be directing the conversations and the plans. But so often, what I see is that families don't include the person with a disability in the conversations. And there are several reasons for that. Most often, uh, as strange as this is going to sound, they don't think about it. They're just thinking about making the decisions for them. They don't think to include their loved one with a disability. And no, that's not the right thing to do. But it just winds up happening, and there's no malice behind it. It's just unfortunately something that we overlook. So it's something that we need to be very deliberate about. Sometimes families do intentionally exclude the person with a disability. Again, not out of malice, but because they're afraid of scaring the individual. They're afraid of hurting their feelings. They're afraid of making them feel overwhelmed. In part, we have to normalize this. We have to help our loved ones understand that someday we're not going to be available. It might be because, we're older and we need somebody else to step in. It might be because, we get sick and then we wouldn't be available to help. But eventually we're going to pass away. And so we need to make those plans, and that, it's important that they get to have a say in their own lives. Um, I've talked to a lot of families where their future plan is that they are going to live 1 minute longer than their loved one. But that's not realistic. And so we've got to make these plans. And so we need to make sure that we're including the loved one with a disability in these plans because it's their life. And we need to have ongoing conversations about all of this. And that's one of the other things that I see fall through the cracks is, people will have the conversation once and they think they're done. Okay, we've made these decisions, good to go. But these are not one and done conversations. These are ongoing conversations, and they need to be ongoing conversations because things change. What we want in life changes, our circumstances change, our experiences change what we want. And so our plans can and should evolve over time. So these need to be ongoing conversations. See another question. What options of including the person with a disability in communication for their future when the level of understanding is very low? You know what? That's a really, really great question, and I'm really glad you asked that because that is something that is a real concern. And so part of it is we have to meet our loved ones where they're at. And so part of that is talking to them. who do they want in their lives? What are the things they want to do? And we're going to talk a little bit more about these conversation topics here in a minute. But part of it is think about what their level of understanding is and match that with, where they're at. Match that to the conversations. But we do need to prepare our loved ones for the reality that eventually we'll be gone, and let them know that that's okay. Let them know that they will be okay when that happens. It's not going to happen now, but we don't know when it will, but that we will always love them and that they will always be safe. They will always have a lot of people in their lives who love them, and that they will still be able to do the things that they want in their lives. Because, especially when we're dealing with individuals who, you know, who may need more help with this, who may have um, a more difficult time understanding some of these concepts, and maybe they can't make all of these decisions themselves, but they should have input on that. They should be able to give as much input as they are able to give. And so, you may have a loved one whose disabilities are more substantial, and are they going to be, directing necessarily where they live, or, how their money's being spent or things like that? Hopefully. But at the very least, they can say, they can tell you that they always want to go swimming at the Y. They can tell you they want to make sure they still see their friends. And they have their own ways of communicating, because I also know that not everybody is able to communicate verbally. Your loved one's communication style. And so that, for example, one of the things that they may want in life is that they always get to, have their movie collection and get to watch their movies whenever they want to, even if they can't say that with words. And so then with that next generation is helping that next generation of support person understand, hey, man, he loves the Three Stooges. Just make sure he's always able to watch the Three Stooges. Make sure he's able to have his favorite foods, and let me show you how he communicates. When he does this, it means that, and give them the tips and the tricks to your loved one. So we're going to keep, but that's an excellent question. And I'm really glad you asked that, because not everybody is at that same level, and not everybody can give really comprehensive input on what they want. But even individuals who are not able to speak, there are still things they like. There are still things they're going to want to continue in their life. And so we can make sure that those things are continuing to happen even once we're gone. So let's talk about some of those conversation topics that we need to have with our loved ones with disabilities. And it's talking about them. Okay, as you get older, what do you want your life to look like? It's funny. I asked my son that when he was in high school. What do you want your life to? What do you want out of life? And he tells me that he wants to live on his own, but he also tells me he's not quite ready for that yet. Okay, so we're going to work on those things. We're going to get things ready so that when he's feeling closer to being ready, we can make some of those things happen. Where do you want to live? Do you want to live on your own? And living on your own does not mean living on an isolated island. Some people are able to live in their own apartment, and we can FaceTime, and we can have, video doorbells in place, and, we can have some technology so that even if they're living alone, there are things helping them and keeping them safe and making sure that they've got the things they need. And maybe that's, you share, you each have an Alexa in your house, and you share that account so that, your loved one, can say, Alexa, add apples to shopping list. And that way it's on your joint shopping list, or whatever the case may be. I'm not the most tech savvy person out there. There are probably better ways to do that. And that's okay too. So do they want to live on their own? Do they want to live with housemates? Do they want to live with other family members? And then who do they want to live with? If you told me that I was going to live with my older sister, hey man, no problem. She and I get along great. If you told me I was going to go live with my younger sister, we might have some issues because sometimes we get along and sometimes we don't. So we want to make sure that we're getting their input on that. I know somebody raised their hand. I don't have a way to be able to allow you to talk. So if you could put your question either in the chat or in the Q&A, we will get to it shortly. But then also ask, what are the things you want to keep doing in life? Because for some people, it's things like making sure they always get to, play basketball when it's basketball season, or that they always get to go swimming at the Y, or that they make sure that they still get to go to church and sing in the choir, and those things. Those are things that are important to them. So what do they want to make sure that they keep doing in life? And then asking them, what's important to you? What are the things that are important to you? What new things do you want to do? And then what do you want to stop doing? They may say, Mom, I don't want to have to mow the grass ever again. I don't want to rake leaves. So maybe that's living someplace where they don't have to deal with yard work, you know? Um, those are some things to think about. And then asking them, what do you want to do differently? And how do you want to do it? Now, don't get me wrong. We're not going to sit down and do this interview like it's a job interview and ask all of these questions. These are conversations to have over time and to come back to and to check in on. But these are some things to kind of keep in mind. And as I'm talking about all of this, if this sounds a little familiar, if this sounds like life course, well, because it kind of is. Not because we're focusing on life course, but because life course has it's those are the questions we need to be asking and the conversations we need to be having. And life course has developed some tools to make that a little bit easier because those are universal things to consider. Um, so you know what? Dan was chiming in. Please add relationships to this section. Absolutely. What relationships do you want to make sure you continue? Whether that's friendships, whether that's dating, and what does dating look like? How do you define dating? I talk with families and I talk with self-advocates, and one of the things that often comes up is those personal relationships. I want to have a boyfriend. And parents are freaked out by that idea. Here's the news flash, family. You're going to be freaked out for when your kids without disabilities are starting to talk to you about dating and relationships too. It's just a universal thing. But you know what? One of the things we never stop to ask our loved ones with disabilities is, what does it mean to have a boyfriend? What does that mean to you? Because we all have our own ideas of what that means. It may be different for our loved ones. So when they say, I want to have a boyfriend, and you say, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, it means we can go to the movies together. Okay. In fact, I was talking with a case manager not too long ago, and she had a client who wanted to get married. And his sister was his legal guardian, and she was absolutely adamant. No way are you going to get married. Absolutely not. I forbid it. And she was legal guardian, so she could forbid it. And they were talking about this literally for several years because this was something he really identified as something he wanted. And so finally somebody asked him, what does it mean to you to be married? And he said, it means I always have somebody to go to the movies with. That's all he thought marriage was, just somebody he'd have to go to the movies with, because he didn't want to be alone. He didn't want to be lonely. And we don't want our kids to be lonely. We don't want our family members to be lonely. We want them to have relationships. We want them to have friendships. And sometimes that means romantic relationships, as much as that freaks us out. But yeah, thank you, Dan, for pointing that out, because that is absolutely something that we need to talk about too. What relationships do you want to have? And who do you want to continue to have in your life? Like I said, this kind of goes along with life course, not because it's life course, but because these are universal issues that people deal with, and Life Course has developed some good tools to help us figure some of these things out, to prompt us with questions to consider and to think about it. And so this is part of, well, I'll be perfectly honest, it's part of my favorite tool, which is the planning life trajectory tool. But this is I like to call this a cheat sheet because it's all about me. It's what do people like and admire about me? What's important to me? And how do you best support me? These are the types of things that can really help other people figure out how to support your loved one, how to be there for your loved one. And so it's really great information. This is the planning trajectory. And so, yeah, what do I want in life? What is my vision of a good life? And just as importantly, what do I not want in life? What are the past experiences in my life that are taking me to what I want? What are the things I still need going forward to get to what I want? Just as importantly, what past experiences are taking me away from what I want? What do I have to be careful of because it might take me away from what I want? Um, so these are the kinds of things to consider when you're doing this. And part of that is considering what you value and what you want for your life, or what you want for your loved one's life and what they want for themselves, and having those conversations. So for example, I have talked with my family many times, and I am not my son's legal guardian. My son does not need a legal guardian, and I recognize that I recognize. I'm not saying guardianship is bad because I recognize there are sometimes where people do need legal guardians. Thankfully, my son does not. He's able to make his own decisions. He just doesn't like to make his own decisions. Um, but I have told my family flat out, when something happens to me, if you go get guardianship of Andy, I will come back and haunt you because I want to make sure that he's able to make his own decisions and he's able to do so. If that were to change at some point, then we reassess. And that's the key with all of this is we constantly reassess. None of this is ever one and done. Things are always changing and evolving, and we need to change and evolve our plans with that, because sometimes we also may make plans and we may have certain people designated to step in and provide support, and then something happens to them. So we need to constantly update those things. This is the integrated support star. And there's another version of this that's called the divided star, where you can list, not only what resources do you currently have, but what resources do you still need to develop? And so this is just a way to kind of think about, what do we already have in our life? What do we still need to develop? And then sharing that information as needed. But part of this is also about spreading things out. As families, and especially as parents, we know how hard this is to do all by ourselves. And so why would we want to set up that next generation to do it all by themselves? We don't. We should talk about spreading these things out. But oftentimes we only think about one person taking over. Well, let's diversify that. Let's identify people's skill sets and then diversify that support. So maybe that's one person taking point on medical matters. Maybe that's somebody else taking point on services, someone else taking over sports, someone else for finances. So, for example, and this is true for our loved ones with disabilities, this is also true for our aging parents. So I'm gonna use both my son and my mom in this. You know, um, when it comes to my son, hey, he's got two aunts who are nurses. So when he's got, when he needs, well, frankly, right now, if there's a medical issue, I'm the one calling them up, asking their advice because that's not my skill set. I can understand some of it, but I'm going to talk it through with people who know more than I am. That's true for my mom too. I am not the person who should be stepping in on medical matters for her when she's got two daughters who are nurses who can do that. But when it comes to finances, I'm your girl. I'm good at keeping track of all of that. When it comes to health insurance and more accurately, making, because it's open enrollment season, helping her figure out what is the right plan for her for next year, I can help with that. I'm not the best at it, but by golly, I can power through and help her figure it out. And I am fluent in bureaucracy. So that is part of my skill set. Um, that's a place where I can help, even though I'm not going to be the best at medical matters. You know, with my son, you know, I'm talking to my younger son right now. He understands Andy's services. In fact, he's going to come even at 17. He's going to come to our next quarterly meeting, in part so that he knows who the people in Andy's team are. He knows who the people he can talk with are. He can ask questions to, and so that he has a better understanding of what Andy's services look like, so that if something did happen to me, Michael can be that support for him. I've got a family that I'm working with right now. The father recently passed away. But the family has been working on these transition plans because the parents were already older and they were in their 80s. And so this isn't, while it was somewhat unexpected, they've been planning about this for a while. And so they've got a son who lives in another state, but he still joins them for his sister's quarterly meetings. You know, sometimes he comes into town for those meetings. Sometimes he calls in to join those meetings. Sometimes he's Zooming in to join those meetings. Um, but he's been involved for a while. So that, you know, now that their father has passed away, if something happens to mom, well, brother already knows all of these things. He knows what resources are available to his sister. He knows what her services look like. So he can step in because they've been slowly planning this over time, and it can be a little bit more seamless. You know, maybe you've got, you know, a brother who is all about sports, and you know your brother and your son, they bond over sports. So maybe that's who you designate to make sure he's getting to and from Special Olympics, potentially even coaching Special Olympics, just throwing that out there. But you know, using the things that people love, using their skill sets, identifying, you know, where they really excel, and bringing those people into your loved one's life. It does not only have to be one person. And if there is anything we have learned over the last 3 years, it's that a lot of things can be done virtually. You know, because I have talked to families over the years where, you know, the parents die and then the family, you know, the family member moves the person to Indiana, or maybe moves them out of Indiana, and they don't know, and they do that without realizing the consequences of that. And sometimes I get those calls in advance. And so one of the things I will do is I will say, hey, before you do that, you need to find out what the services look like where they're at, and what the services look like where you're thinking about moving them to. Because one of the hard decisions you may have to make is letting your loved one stay in Michigan, where he's got all sorts of services and supports, and he's got all sorts of friends, and he's got his own life. And I know you love your brother dearly and you want to move him here with you, but it's going to be 3 years before he even gets services because we've got a waiting list. And those services are only going to be about a fourth of what he gets now. So you've got to decide if that's really what's in your brother's best interest. And so sometimes we've got to have some of those conversations. And that sister who's in Indiana can do things virtually for her brother in Michigan. We have learned how to do that. And so that makes things a little bit easier too. See, we've got another question up here. Um, okay. We have guardianship with our son, but should sibling have it before our death, or can they do it after? You are about 2 slides ahead of me, my dear, because we are absolutely going to be getting to that, because that is a really, really important topic. But before we get there, let's talk about those next steps. And so part of it is we have to get people comfortable with our loved ones and with their lives and what that looks like before we ask them to join in as that next generation of support. So like I said, you know, you're going to be seeing your family for Thanksgiving and for the holidays coming up. That's great. You don't start by saying, hey, we've never had this conversation before, but if something happens to me, will you step in and help with my child? Let's have those conversations and have those ongoing conversations, because when we have those conversations that are ongoing, it makes it more accessible. It normalizes our loved one's life. It helps people understand, oh, wait, There are lots of things that are going on here and lots of supports that are out there. And so we want to get that next generation of supporters, whether that's siblings, cousins, could still be aunts and uncles, could be nieces and nephews. If you've got a 22-year-old niece, hey, guess what? We can still be talking to them about these things too. Because ideally, I'm going to live for several more decades. But if not, or even if I do live for several more decades, the chances are my son's cousins are still going to be in his life. They still love him. They still want to help. And if I say, hey, can you help? They're going to. So part of my job as the parent is to help prepare that next generation for that. And so, you want to be able to get them comfortable with your loved one's life and get your loved one used to going to others for help and support. And that's also one of those keys because our loved ones always come to us. And that's good, but we also want to get them used to the idea of they can also talk to Aunt Ann. They can also talk to Parker and Patrick. They can also talk to Michael. They can talk to those other people in their lives too. And then invite that next generation to events, and not just, yes, that includes, quarterly meetings for the waiver, but that can also mean just inviting them to, the bowling tournament, just inviting them to some of the different activities that they do to get them used to some of those things. And it is important, especially, to get somebody, if somebody's going to step in and help provide support, especially for waiver services, eventually we want to bring them into those quarterly meetings so that they learn who the case manager is, so that they learn what services they're getting and who's providing those services and who they can call with questions or if they have concerns. And then when they're ready for it, that's when you ask them to join that support team. So now we need to talk about those practical issues. And here's that question that we just discussed a moment ago, which is if someone is currently under guardianship, I advise that you add a co-guardian before mom and dad pass away. There are a lot of people who believe that when that guardianship ends when the guardian dies. That is not accurate because we tend to focus on the guardian. It's not about the guardian. It's about the fact that this person has been declared a protected person, and it just so happens that they name mom and dad as guardian. Well, that protected person status doesn't end. And so too often what I see is that while everybody is mourning and while we're planning for the funeral, somebody's got to make an emergency run to court because that individual is not allowed to be without a guardian. So if you can, go ahead and add a co-guardian on before you get to that point. You can name a successor guardian in your will. A court can take that into consideration. They don't have to, but they can. But the bigger issue is that still somebody has to make an emergency run to court to at least get temporary guardianship until something can be more permanently settled while everybody is grieving and while everybody is doing a lot around the parents passing. So I recommend adding them on beforehand. If the individual is not under guardianship, explain to that support network, hey, he doesn't need a guardian. We've got all sorts of alternatives to guardianship that have worked for us. Here, we use supported decision making. We use power of attorney. I'm his healthcare representative, and that has been enough. If it turns out to not be enough later, you can always go back. But if somebody's not under guardianship and it's working, you don't need it now. If mom or dad are rep payee, there are some things to consider. So first of all, in my experience, what happens when an individual passes away, either the coroner's office or most often the funeral home notifies Social Security right away that the individual has passed away. what's going to happen is that flags in the Social Security computer system, and they see, oh, David was rep payee for Bob. Well, David has just passed away. And what happens is they put Bob's Social Security benefits on hold until a new rep payee is named. If you have money, that's okay. You've got ways to deal with that. A lot of people don't have that much extra money because it can take a few months to set all of that up. So if you can, like if mom is getting older, then maybe we move rep payee over to, a sibling. Maybe ideally what I'd love to see if possible is that we're teaching the individual the skills to manage money on their own so that maybe they can take over as their own rep payee with the support of their support network. Some people can do that. I recognize not everybody is able to do that, and that's okay. But, if we're talking mom is in her, late 70s, early 80s, then maybe it's time to switch that rep payee to somebody else so that when mom does pass, we don't have any disruption in Social Security benefits. Don't get me wrong, the individual will always eventually get that money back, but your rent doesn't immediately stop just because your Social Security gets disrupted. One of the other things to consider is setting up a special needs trust. And here I'm going to specify a special needs trust simply because there is a maximum amount you can put into an ABLE account each month. Right now, you can only put about $17,000 into an ABLE account each year from all sources, whereas there's no limit on how much money you can put into a special needs trust. And a lot of people will open a trust but not put any money in it until the parent passes away. And a lot of times those are funded either through a life insurance policy or through the will and estate. Because if the person inherits money directly, it causes issues. Okay. They're not insurmountable issues, but it's a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of headache. And if you can ward that off in advance, I recommend doing that. So, for example, and I know I'm being kind of selfish here in saying it like this, but I have a trust set up for my son so that when I pass away, instead of my son inheriting the money directly, I have the beneficiary listed as the ARC Master Trust for the benefit of my son. That way, the money goes straight into a trust. It's never counted as income by Medicaid or Social Security, and it doesn't mess up those benefits at all. So, and that way, I'm also setting money aside for him so that when I'm gone, if he needs new blue jeans, he can get new blue jeans. If he needs a new TV, he can get a new TV. That money's there to pay for the things that I would normally pay for. But since I'm gone, I won't be able to. This is the way I can still do that. And so I highly recommend setting up a special needs trust, at least a framework for it, so that we're not putting our loved ones' benefits in jeopardy. I will also tell you that recently my aunt passed away. And I am the executor of her estate. So I've learned a few. I've learned a few things in that time that I was not expecting to. Some things have popped up that would have never occurred to me in advance. And I'll be honest, we had a one and done conversation. She called me up. She said, "Hey, will you do this?" I said, "Of course I will." Why? Because my aunt was asking for help. I'd do anything for her. And in my head, oh, it's just paperwork. I'm good at paperwork. Oh, it is so much more than that. But one of the things I will recommend, make a list of all of your accounts and all of your loved ones' accounts, including things like their Medicaid account, their My Social Security account, things like that, and the passwords. I know computer experts out there are like, oh my God, don't write down your password. You know what? Sometimes you have to. And I will say, when my dad passed away, he had been having health issues for about a year and a half. And he was very good. He wrote down all of his accounts. He wrote down all of the usernames and all of the passwords. And I'll be darned if he didn't change every single one of those passwords before he passed away. Our saving grace was that we all knew the answers to all of his security questions. We didn't know that for my aunt. So I'm going to say make a list of all the accounts, make a list of all the usernames and passwords so that somebody is able to get into those as needed. And keep a list of all the activities and the services that your loved ones are involved with and the contact information for them. So if your son is a Special Olympics swimmer and swims every spring, that you write that down so that they know they can call Coach Tom when they have questions to make sure that he's still getting a Special Olympics. So that, if something happens to me, that next person sees, oh, he's already got a behavior specialist. We're going to call that person who can then help us so that we can talk with him and so that he can talk with them and process that grief and provide some more supports, in the immediate time frame to help them through this process. So we need to be able to list all of that so that that next person knows what's available and who to contact for all of that. So we've gotten some more questions in. Okay. Can you add co-guardian after you have already gotten guardianship? You absolutely can, and that part is so much easier. The hardest part about guardianship is that first you need to prove the individual needs a guardian. You've already done that. So now you're just adding on a co-guardian. That process is a whole lot easier. While I am not an attorney, I will say it should be cheaper. They should not be charging you the same amount that they charged you for establishing guardianship, because that's not what we're having to do. We're just having to add the next person on. I will say, though, too, that there are some limits in who can be a guardian. So, for example, the guardian has to be over 18. Okay. So, like right now, if I did have guardianship of my son, I could not add my younger son on because he's not 18 yet. Also, regardless of their relationship, somebody who has had a felony conviction, and especially a conviction for theft, a conviction for abuse or neglect or exploitation, even if they're the parent, they cannot become a legal guardian for a person over 18. So there are a few limits on who can be a guardian, but yeah, you can absolutely add a co-guardian after you've established guardianship. That is common and it is easy to do. Okay. And then is there an age limit for that kind of trust? Nope. So a special needs trust is a specific type of account that was created in federal law 36 years ago. And I believe that's accurate because our trust is just celebrated their 35th anniversary. So, but it was created in federal law specifically to allow families, normally parents or grandparents, to set money aside for a person with a disability without jeopardizing their benefits. And then a few years later, Congress passed an update to that legislation to allow individuals with disabilities themselves to create their own special needs trust. So a person with a disability can start their own trust if necessary, but if the families can set it up ahead of time and have money directly go into that trust, it makes life a whole lot easier. And as far as an age limit, there's not an age limit, but if they are over 18, Social Security has to say that they are disabled at some point. So there are a few regulations like that. And I will be perfectly honest, I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to special needs trusts, but I am smart enough to get you to experts to ask for the more specifics on that. And as we are talking about this, one of the things that some of you may have recognized is that as we're talking about making sure our loved ones with disabilities are included in this, letting them drive the conversation, bringing in that network of support, those are also the same ways we do supported decision making. And so we're really kind of setting up that same process. And that's really, it's a lot of overlap. And so it's helping to create a network of support for our loved ones, helping them, help broaden out the people that they can go to when they have questions or when they need help making a decision or things like that. And making sure that we're including them in all of these decisions because it is their life and they should have as much of a say as they can have in all of this. So there's a lot of similarity to supported decision making in this process of bringing in that next generation for when we're gone. So somebody else asked, can a co-guardian be a non-citizen? I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm not 100% sure. I believe I have seen some cases where a non-citizen has been allowed to be a guardian. I believe I have also seen some cases where that has not been allowed to happen. And part of that could be that it depends on the jurisdiction. And when I say that, I mean, the specific state. Different states may have different rules on that. It also could, here in Indiana, we have guardianship laws, but at the same time, individual judges are given a lot of leeway in the decisions they make. And so it could be a judge by judge case. I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not 100% sure, but that is something that you can absolutely and should talk with an attorney about. So we've been talking for a little while. What other questions do you have? And I'll give a few minutes as we keep typing. Oh, wasn't expecting that to stop. But here's the other thing is none of us are alone in all of this. We all have people that we can talk to, and you can always call the ARC and talk to one of our family advocates about this and ask your specific questions, kind of get into the details with us, ask those things that you have questions about and ask those questions that you've been afraid to ask. Ask those things that you've been afraid to say out loud. Every single one of us is either a parent, a self-advocate, or a sibling. So we all live this life too. We're going to talk you through it and you're able to ask questions and we'll get you every answer that we can. Again, you can always reach the ARC at 317-977-2375. Ask to talk to a family advocate. If you've got questions about special needs trusts, you can call the ARC, same phone number, 317-977-2375, and ask to talk to somebody in the trust. You're likely going to talk to Sarah Geis or Melissa Justice, and they will gladly answer your questions. Even if you're not setting up a trust, even if you're just doing some preliminary research, they're more than happy to talk with you about all of that. So you're always welcome to give us a call and ask. Can there be a successor rep payee named? So I'm going to say yes, and the reason I'm saying yes, so my son does not have a rep payee. Social Security actually, from the very beginning, agreed to let him manage his own money, which I was really excited about. That was my goal for that. I was prepared to advocate for that, and they said it right off the bat. But one of the forms that they had him fill out was a form naming a successor rep payee, so that if something were to happen to him or if his condition, got worse, who would he want to be his rep payee? And so, yes, I know that form exists because my son had to fill that out. So I believe that there is a way that you can name a successor rep payee. I will also say that Social Security has some more regulations when it comes to rep payees. So, for example, they want that rep payee to basically be local. So even, one of the things that's common here in Indiana is that you may have a guardian that is out of state. So like if, if mom, if the individual lives in Indianapolis and mom passes away, but brother in Michigan is co-guardian, that's pretty common here in Indiana. But Social Security, in my experience, would not allow the brother in Michigan to be the rep payee because he's too far away from the individual. They want that rep payee to be close so that they can quickly address any of the financial needs that the individual may need. One of the other things that is really common here in Indiana, especially, is for provider agencies to be an individual's rep payee. talk to the provider agency if that's something you want to look into. And sometimes that can also be good if there are arguments about how money is spent. Sometimes that can take some of that pressure off there. But at the same time, you want to make sure you trust that provider agency to be the rep payee, and that you can always, call and ask questions on how money is being spent and all of that. So that's another option that is available for people too. So I'm really, really glad you asked that. What other questions do you guys have? I need somebody to ask a question because we're sitting on 13 questions and I'm just a little, superstitious at this point. Thank you. Somebody just chimed in with one. In Indiana, once a guardian, do you, I think what it's asking is, do you have to renew it, like in other states? So I think I'm understanding your question. Here in Indiana, once somebody is placed under guardianship, it's not that they have to renew, at least right now, it's not that they have to renew the guardianship, but you are supposed to report to the court either once a year or once every other year about the person's status. So that's writing a report to the court saying how their money is being managed if the person is power or is guardian of the estate, which is managing the money. Um, if they're guardian of the person that's reporting to the court, hey, here the doctors are saying, here's what their health looks like, here are the things they're doing in life, here's where they live, and then also updating the court anytime there's a change. So for example, if the individual moves, you're supposed to report that to the court that they have moved. If the person's had a major health issue, you should report that to the court so that so that the court knows what's going on. And really that's supposed to be kind of a way to have a little bit of oversight to make sure that the individual is getting the medical care that they need, and to make sure that their finances are properly being managed, so that first of all, their bills are getting paid, nobody's stealing from them, and nobody's investing their money in sea monkey farms. I mean, it's really kind of basic, which I would love to see it strengthened a little bit more. But ideally, most courts will require you to provide an update to the court every year or every other year, as opposed to like actually going through the whole guardianship process again. Now, I will also say here in Indiana, guardianship does not cross state lines. So if somebody in another state who is under guardianship moves to Indiana, you have to reestablish guardianship in Indiana. If you are in Indiana and under guardianship and you move to another state, you likely need to reestablish guardianship in that new state. So there are some states who are part of who have signed on to an agreement to recognize each other's guardianships. Indiana has not signed on to that. I would love to tell you the name of that particular law. It's like 13 words long, and the letters don't make a word acronym. So I can't do that. I would love to tell you that, but I can't. So I just want to point that out. If I'm the only guardian, and for so many reasons I can't be anymore, the worst is when you don't have anyone else around to take over. What other options have we for our loved ones? And I am so glad you asked that, because I know that that is one of the biggest fears that families have. And so there are a few options. Number one, you can take this time now to try to create that network of support, so that you may not have anybody now who's willing or able to take over guardianship, but you might be able to develop some new relationships. And maybe in 5 years, you might be able to have somebody you can identify as a potential other guardian. But we do also have several volunteer guardianship programs in Indiana. Not every county has them, but now we're up to about half of all counties in Indiana do have a volunteer guardianship program. And what I mean by volunteer is that the individuals who are acting as guardians are professionals, but they're called volunteer guardians because they're not charging the individual a monthly fee to be their guardian. There are also professional guardians who do charge a fee to be the individual's guardian. Sometimes, depending on what regulations are in play, they may charge a monthly fee to do that. There are some professional guardians who charge an hourly rate to be somebody's guardian. I would much rather see somebody who needs it be part of a volunteer guardianship program, especially because a lot of our individuals, only have SSI or have very limited funds, and they don't need to be spending the money on a guardian, or at least that is my opinion. So I'd rather see that volunteer, and especially with the volunteer guardianship programs, because they are done in cooperation with the Indiana State Supreme Court, they also have certain rules that they have to follow. And there's a little bit more oversight in things like that. And so they are often more likely to actually know the person that they are guardian of, and try to develop a relationship that way. So if somebody does not have someone who can step in as a guardian, there are many counties who do have volunteer guardianship programs who can do that. Okay. So the next question. So my parents and brothers live in Mississippi. Both of my brothers have significant intellectual disabilities, and my parents have guardianship in Mississippi. I'm under the impression that the guardianship is only valid in the state they live in. How would I go about making sure I can make decisions for them once my parents pass without issues? So first of all, you need to talk to a probate or an elder law attorney in Mississippi, okay? Because every state's guardianship laws are different. If this were Indiana, you could already be named a co-guardian, and the fact that you live in another state would not matter. You'd still be able to make decisions, and especially once your parents passed, it wouldn't be a big deal because they'd still already have a guardian in place. I don't know how Mississippi does that, so you really need to find out what Mississippi's laws are, and you do that by talking to a an elder law or a probate attorney. Those are the ones who typically deal with adult guardianship. They are also conveniently the ones who typically write people's wills. So hopefully your parents would already have somebody that they've worked with. Well, they would have somebody that they've worked with in the past when they initially got guardianship. So you can talk to them about Mississippi's specific things. Also talk about what types of supports your brothers are getting in Mississippi, and will they be able to stay in Mississippi and continue to get supports after your parents pass away? How do we make sure that happens? That way your brothers are able to continue to live in their community. They're able to continue to have their jobs if they work. They're able to continue to be, have their friends, go to their day programs, have the life that they want and that they're involved with without having as much of an interruption. So you can start planning some of those things now, start having some of those conversations now, and go ahead and when your brothers have their quarterly meetings, because typically those services, each state, they're going to have things like quarterly meetings and things along those lines. Make sure that you're joining those. Even if you're joining by telephone, even if you're joining by Zoom, that way those service providers get to know who you are and get used to you. You learn who they are. You learn what types of things your brothers are doing. And that way we can make that a little bit more of a seamless transition when the time comes. But I am extremely glad you asked, and I am extremely glad that you joined us tonight to be able to get more information. So, any other questions? All right. Well, something just came in. I have guardianship of my son for about 10 years, and I've never done anything with the courts. Who do I contact to see what I need to do to update that? So I would likely call, and Dan is going to correct me if I'm wrong on this, which is a good thing. I would actually call the court clerk's office in your county. Potentially the Superior Court, I think, is the one who does guardianship, and that's what Dan will confirm for me one way or the other. But call the clerk's office, let them know, hey, I'm guardian of my son. What type of report do I need to give to the court? Some courts have very, and when I say some courts, what I mean is some specific county courts have specific forms they want you to fill out. Some just want you to write them a letter letting them know what's going on. Some, especially if you're a guardian of the estate, will want financial records, and that can be as simple as bank statements, showing how their money is being used. And some will want, depending on how complex the financial situation is, they may want more detailing than that. For a lot of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they don't necessarily have big estates themselves, so oftentimes we don't deal with that, but we would with older parents, for example. But yeah, call the clerk of the court for your county, and ask them. That's the easiest way to start. Okay. Sometimes you can go back to the attorney who helped you establish guardianship. Sometimes they will charge you a lot of money, and they'll say, "Oh, we can do that," and they'll charge you, between $200 and $300 an hour to do that. Or you should be able to do that yourself. That is one of the nice things, is that for the most part, in Indiana, we do kind of set some things up to make it a little bit easier to do those reportings on your own. Okay. So yeah, just start by calling the clerk's office, the county clerk's office, and asking them. And if they don't have an answer, you can call the court directly. All right. All right. Like I said, if you've got more questions, or if you're anything like me, you will think of something 3 weeks from now, by all means, give us a call at the ARC. Talk to one of our family advocates. We will gladly talk to you about your specific situation, and really kind of talk that through with you. Again, the number for the ARC is 317-977-2375. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, everybody. I hope this has been helpful. We will be posting it on YouTube and on the ARC Academy, so that, if you want to go back and rewatch it later, you can absolutely do so. Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.